This stormwater management training is intended to give an overview regarding the Stormwater Best Management Practices, or BMPs, and the maintenance requirements under the New Jersey Administrative Code 7:8-5.8, which are also known as the Stormwater Management Rules, as well as the various municipal stormwater general permits issued under NJAC 7:14A. In addition to this regulatory and permitting requirement, this training provides a holistic view of the maintenance work that ensures the stormwater BMPs function well. This training is divided into two parts covering 4 topics. The first part, Introduction to Stormwater Management and Stormwater BMPs, provides a general understanding of the stormwater best management practices, that is, how they function, what they look like, and the basic requirements to ensure they work correctly. The second part covers the following 3 topics. Maintenance of stormwater BMPs, that is, the elements of maintenance and the tools to assure the maintenance is properly performed. An example of using a checklist to inspect a BMP, and examples of commonly occurring maintenance issues. Part 1. Introduction to Stormwater Management and Stormwater BMPs. Why do we need to manage stormwater? When it rains, some of the precipitation will soak into the ground to either be absorbed by plants or will migrate into groundwater. The rest becomes runoff, which flows to nearby streams, stormwater collection systems, or to lower lying areas. How much rain is retained in the ground and how much rain becomes runoff are, generally speaking, affected by the type of land cover. If the land is covered by vegetation, the soil and the plants will intercept a fair portion of rain and produce less runoff. If the land is covered by hard, smooth, impervious surfaces, like asphalt and solid concrete, most of the rain falling on the impervious surface will become runoff. This runoff will wash pollutants, such as particles from a car's exhaust emissions, trash, and oil or grease that was previously deposited on the impervious surfaces, into nearby streams and pollute the water. The runoff from the impervious surfaces may cause concentrated flow, which can then cause flooding and soil erosion on neighboring lands. Therefore, stormwater runoff needs to be properly managed to avoid increasing pollution, flooding, and erosion. Construction, which results in increased runoff, also leads to a reduction in groundwater recharge. The Department of Environmental Protection protects the waters of the state through many means, some of which include the requirements to manage stormwater runoff from major development and through the Municipal Stormwater General Permit Program, which includes permits issued to highway agencies, municipal separate storm sewer systems known as MS4s, and public complexes. Under these rules and permits, stormwater management is required to address the impacts of runoff for pollutants, increases in flow, erosion, and applicable groundwater issues. To meet those requirements, stormwater management measures, also known as Stormwater Best Management Practices, or BMPs, are commonly utilized in the field of stormwater management and engineering. Basically, stormwater runoff flows through a BMP while removing pollutants from the runoff, reducing the rate or volume of flow, and then recharging groundwater. Cleaner runoff is then safely discharged into a nearby stream, the ground as groundwater recharge, a municipal separate storm sewer system, a combined sewer overflow, or an area located at a lower elevation. Here, we would like to briefly introduce the function of stormwater BMPs. This is important because one of the goals of performing maintenance is to keep the BMPs functioning as they are intended. By understanding the basic functions of BMPs, you will have a better sense of what shall be done or what shall not be done in your maintenance work. Stormwater BMPs are designed to perform pollution control, flood control, and erosion control, as well as provide groundwater recharge. In order to provide flood control, the BMP retains the volume of runoff produced by the drainage area and then releases the runoff slowly. Detention basins, wet ponds, and constructed wetlands are BMPs that control flooding. Some of these BMPs will discharge the runoff entirely and empty completely, but some of the BMPs will retain some depth of water after discharging runoff. We will discuss these BMPs in more detail later. For pollution control, stormwater BMPs use 3 primary mechanisms: infiltration, settling, and vegetative uptake or filtering. A stormwater BMP can collect runoff in a basin and then let the runoff go through the basin bottom into the subsoil. This is called infiltration. After all of the runoff is infiltrated, sediments and pollutants will be kept within the basin. Infiltration basins, sand filters, and bioretention systems are 3 examples of BMPs that use infiltration as a pollution control mechanism. Another way stormwater BMPs remove pollutants is by collecting runoff in a basin and keeping the runoff for a period of time. While the runoff is contained, gravity causes heavy solids, also known as total suspended solids, and pollutants to settle on the basin bottom while the cleaner runoff is discharged through the basin outlet pipe. Extended detention basins, wet ponds, constructed wetlands, and subsurface gravel wetlands are examples that use settling as a pollution control mechanism. The third way to remove pollutants from runoff is by allowing it to flow through a vegetated area. Pollutants are either filtered out by physical contact or taken up by the plants through their roots. Examples of BMPs that use vegetative uptake or filtering include vegetative filter strips and grass swales. Subsurface gravel wetlands also use vegetative uptake in part to remove pollutants from stormwater runoff. An additional biochemical reaction also takes place within the confines of the subsurface gravel bed to remove nitrogen from the runoff. For groundwater recharge, stormwater BMPs use infiltration to direct runoff into the ground below the root zone of plants, where it helps to maintain the groundwater table. A stormwater BMP can collect runoff in a basin where it soaks through the basin bottom material for treatment, with clean runoff infiltrating into the subsoil. The result is that sediments will be trapped on the basin bottom and pollutants are retained in the basin media. Infiltration basins, sand filters, and bioretention systems that have no under-drain pipes, dry wells, and pervious pavement systems with storage beds are examples of BMPs that use infiltration as a pollution control mechanism. After understanding the functions of stormwater BMPs, let's take a moment to see what basic attributes are normally present. Generally, for maintenance purposes, the stormwater BMPs can be categorized into 4 types: dry basins, wet basins, vegetative BMPs, and manufactured treatment devices. For the dry basin type, the stormwater basin normally has no water in it, and the top of the basin bottom is dry if it has not rained in the past 3 days. For the wet basin type, the basin is always filled with collected runoff. For the vegetative BMPs, the top of the vegetative area is normally dry, and water or ponding should not be visible within that area if it has not rained in the past 3 days. To reiterate, dry basin type BMPs are normally empty of water, meaning no visible water or ponding in the bottom of the BMP. This type includes infiltration basins, sand filters, extended detention basins, bioretention systems, and pervious pavement. These BMPs remove pollutants from runoff by trapping them at the surface while runoff soaks through the bottom of the basin into the subsurface layers. The extended detention basin holds stormwater runoff and discharges it slowly over a prolonged period of time, providing flood control. It may take 10 to 12 hours to empty most of the runoff collected in a detention basin and take up to 72 hours to entirely drain the basin. The detention basin removes pollutants via settling. Here are schematic views and photos of sand filters and infiltration basins. The top and the profile views of the basins show how the runoff goes into this basin and enters the subsurface layers of the basin, but they normally look like the photos, dry with no visible ponding. The distinction between a sand filter and an infiltration basin is not always made from their appearance. Both have optional vegetative cover. The sand filter has a minimum sand layer thickness of 18 inches with an optional underdrain below the required stone choker course. The sand itself has a maximum field permeability of 4 inches per hour. On the other hand, the infiltration basin requires a minimum sand layer thickness of 6 inches with a much higher allowable field permeability and no underdrain. Both generally hold no more than 2 feet of collected runoff and also have a required minimum 2-foot separation between the bottom of the lowest layer and the seasonal high water table. This minimal distance is reduced to 1 foot for the sand filter with underdrain. I mention this separation requirement because the presence of standing water in either a sand filter or an infiltration basin 72 or more hours after a rainfall event indicates a serious problem with the BMP. There is normally enough room for all the runoff to soak below the ground surface while the pollutants are trapped at the surface. Standing water means the basin bottom may be clogged or compacted, or else the seasonal high water table and soil properties were incorrectly determined. Sometimes a stormwater basin is designed to incorporate 2 functions: infiltration for smaller storms and extended detention or flood control for larger storms. In this case, there will be no small orifice located near the bottom of the outlet control structure. This configuration allows runoff from the smaller storms to soak into the ground and subsoil. Excess runoff will discharge if the water level reaches or exceeds that of the bottom weir. In this photo, we gather clues that this basin is a combination type in part because there is no low flow channel, and more importantly, in that there is no small orifice near the bottom of the outlet structure. Runoff produced by a moderate storm will flow out through the bottom weir. Runoff will flow out both weirs during larger storms. Excessive storms will also see flow overtop the outlet structure. If the basin were no longer able to infiltrate runoff, there would be standing water present. Considering the volume of runoff the basin can store, the design will also provide some flood control by limiting the rate of flow leaving the basin after the larger storms. Here are schematic views and photos of a section of pervious pavement and a bioretention system. The runoff enters the top layer of the BMP and moves downwards into the subsurface layers. Just like the photos, the surface is normally dry with no visible ponding. These are both complex systems with special requirements and limitations, which are discussed in the respective chapters of the BMP manual available online. Let's recap the basic requirements of the Dry-Basin type BMPs. These requirements are to ensure the basins function as intended by the design. A Dry-Basin type BMP is supposed to be dry most of the time. Therefore, if it is not fully drained 72 hours after a rain event, it may indicate a failing basin issue caused by a clogged basin bottom, soil compaction, or a high groundwater table. We will talk about how to prevent and fix these issues later. It is especially important that the bottom of a dry basin BMP not be compacted. Therefore, heavy equipment like trucks, tractors, and heavy motors must not be driven onto the basin at any time, including periodic maintenance. The second type of stormwater BMP is the Wet-Basin type, which is normally filled with stormwater at a fixed depth. Stormwater runoff transports solids and pollutants into the pond. The heavy particles settle on the pond bottom. The clean runoff is later discharged from an orifice located above the pond bottom. A Wet-Basin type BMP can also be designed to have extra storage space above the normal water surface level to provide temporary storage of stormwater runoff and later release it slowly as a means to provide flood control. Wet-Basin type BMPs include wet ponds, constructed wetlands, and subsurface gravel wetlands. It should be noted that the required pool can be a safety issue. Here are schematic views and photos of a wet pond and constructed wetlands. The distinction between a wet pond and a constructed wetlands is that constructed wetlands have extensive shallow areas that feature a dense growth of wetland plants with a small deep pool, while a wet pond has a large deep pool area with limited, if any, areas of perimeter vegetation. Normally, the water depth of a wet pond and the pool area of a constructed wetlands shall be around 3 to 6 feet deep in order to provide space for storage of settled solids and reduce thermal impacts on a receiving water body. Shallow areas will warm up, especially in summer. If stagnation occurs, conditions might lead to mosquito problems, algal bloom, and the development of odorous anaerobic conditions. It may be necessary to aerate the pool to reduce. Here are schematic views and images of a subsurface gravel wetlands. The illustrations depict the system full after the water quality design storm event. The runoff is piped into the gravel bed where it will undergo biochemical reactions between storm events. The top photo shows the construction of the lined gravel bed. The completed BMP in action is shown in the lower photo. You can see that the system is lined, filled with gravel, and topped with soil. In contrast to wet ponds and constructed wetlands, subsurface gravel wetlands contain a limited amount of runoff above the soil layer that allows the wetland plants to grow. The soil layer is poorly drained and must stay moist to support the vegetation. Large particles and debris are trapped by the vegetation and remain on the surface. There is some uptake of pollutants by the plants. The plants are required in order to support the subsurface biochemical reactions. A subsurface gravel wetlands normally has two components, which are called cells. Runoff is piped into the gravel bed of each cell, displacing runoff stored from the previous event. Between events, biochemical reactions take place in the void spaces of the gravel beds using raw materials from the plants. The next storm event pushes the treated stormwater out. The surface wetland cells have shallow water and are prone to mosquito breeding and odor issues. However, aeration of water is not feasible because the typical aerator cannot operate in such shallow water. Therefore, special care has to be taken for subsurface gravel wetlands. Let's recap the basic requirements of the wet basin type BMPs to ensure proper functioning. For wet ponds and constructed wetlands, the specific water depth of the pond shall be maintained. If the water depth becomes too shallow, removal of sediment may be required. Also, they shall not have anaerobic, mosquito breeding, and algal blooming problems. Also, special attention must be paid to safety measures to prevent the risk of drowning. The vegetative BMPs use vegetation to intercept pollutants in the runoff. Runoff flows through a densely vegetated area at a shallow water depth approximately 2 inches or less. A grass swale is a channel-shaped area of turf grass which not only removes pollutants but also conveys runoff as open channel flow. A vegetative filter strip is an area of dense plants which may be woods, turf grasses, or meadow. The runoff is spread out into these vegetative areas. Unlike grass swales, a vegetative filter strip basically does not function as a conveyor of runoff. Here are the schematic views and images pertaining to grass swales and vegetative filter strips. Note that the vegetative filter strip is allowed in slopes only between 4.6 and 8%, depending on the vegetation types and the soil types, but grass swales can have a longitudinal slope up to 10%. All vegetative type BMPs need healthy, dense vegetation without channelization of flow. Also, both grass swales and vegetative filter strips must be devoid of ponded areas of water, spots of dead vegetation or bare soil, and areas exhibiting erosion of soil. Let's recap the basic requirements of the vegetative type BMPs. They are fully drained within 72 hours after the rain event. Groundwater level shall be separated by at least 1 foot from the bottom of the swale or vegetative strip. They require healthy, dense vegetation and no channelization through the vegetated area. Also, any trash, debris, or excessive sediment that tends to clog the outlet and inlet of a grass swale and then result in water ponding in the swale must be removed. A special type of stormwater BMP is the manufacturer treatment device, or MTD. They are not like the other 3 types of BMPs, which generally are constructed on the site. Most MTDs are prefabricated, transported to the site, and then installed. The MTDs recognized by NJDEP are all geared towards controlling suspended sediment. They have special features to remove pollutants from the runoff. 13 MTDs are currently certified for use in New Jersey under specific limitations and conditions. Some of the MTDs work like a centrifuge, using cyclone action to separate heavy solids from the runoff and are called hydrodynamic separators. Some of the MTDs use filter media or other treatment media to intercept and remove pollutants. Regardless of which methods and principles they adopt, MTDs normally need more frequent care to remove sediments or replace the treatment media. Those MTDs certified by NJDEP are available on the DEP's website, but in order to keep the MTDs functioning correctly, care must be taken to strictly follow the manufacturer's operation and maintenance manual. For this training, we provide only a brief introduction to stormwater BMPs. Details of a particular BMP's working principles, design requirements, and maintenance requirements are all available on NJDEP's website. The DEP has recently updated some of its BMP manual chapters. The graphics and language have all been updated to make it easier for both designers and maintenance crews to understand. You can either use the hyperlink shown on the slide or search online for NJDEP Stormwater. When performing maintenance work, it is important to know the type of BMP present and its design details, such as the minimum depth of sand, the water depth, etc. Misjudgment of a BMP's type will not only result in ineffective maintenance, but also cause the BMP to fail. Therefore, it is important to know what type of BMP is present before performing the inspection and maintenance work. After the previous introduction to the various types of BMPs, let's use that information to guess what type of basins are shown in these two photos. The basin in the top left looks like a wet pond because it's filled with water, and I know you can't see it, but it is approximately 4 feet deep. The basin in the top right photo looks like an infiltration basin because it looks like a shallow basin with some vegetation on the surface. However, the top left basin is actually an infiltration basin or possibly a detention basin. The top left photo was taken on a day that had received approximately 1 inch of rain, but the bottom left photo was taken about a week later. There had been no rain in the 3 days prior to the second photo being taken. You may notice in the photo some water has ponded in the basin, but basically it is a dry type basin. The basin in the top right photo is actually a sand filter. The top right photo and the bottom right photo were taken at different times of the year, and you can see that some vegetation took root in the sandy bottom at one time. From these two examples, it can be seen that the appearance of BMPs are sometimes deceiving. Therefore, the best way to know the type of basin you're dealing with is to refer back to the design documents, specifically the site plans and the Stormwater Management Design Report. What if the site plans and Stormwater Management Design Reports are not available? The best you can do is to make an educated guess based on a field examination and some detective work. For example, a wet basin type BMP may have an impermeable, geosynthetic, or clay liner on its bottom to keep water in the wet basin. However, in a high water table area, a wet pond may not need a liner because the groundwater will sufficiently supply water into the wet pond. Sometimes, a detention basin will have lined basin bottom too. Nevertheless, an infiltration basin and sand filter will not have a clay nor an impermeable geosynthetic liner. Therefore, an examination of the bottom liner may give major direction as to the type of the basin. Another example is to check the depth of the sand layer. A bottom with 18 inches of sand will most likely be a sand filter rather than an infiltration basin. Also, although it has been said that the appearance of a basin is not an accurate way to identify the type of basin, examining the outlet control structure will help you on your way to making an educated guess. For example, if you see a small, that is 2.5 to 3 inch diameter orifice near the bottom with a low flow channel, you're probably looking at a detention basin. However, if there is no such orifice, the BMP is likely to either be an infiltration basin or a combination infiltration extended detention basin. Another hint is the size of the drainage area. For wet ponds and constructed wetlands, the drainage area requirement is at least 10 acres for a wet pond and 10 to 25 acres for a constructed wetlands. For an infiltration basin or detention basin, the drainage area can be much smaller. A further hint is the depth of the basin. As mentioned previously, a wet pond and a constructed wetlands require a pond depth from 3 to 6 feet, but an infiltration basin will normally not have such a depth. However, a detention basin can have a depth ranging from 3 to 12 feet. Therefore, use of the depth as a hint must be done cautiously. Having said that, it shall be emphasized again that good record keeping of the site plans and stormwater management design report will greatly help the maintenance work. Let's summarize this presentation regarding the introduction to stormwater management and stormwater BMPs. We talked about the reasons we need stormwater management. Stormwater runoff needs to be properly managed to avoid increasing pollution, flooding, and erosion. The basic functions of stormwater BMPs include pollution control, flood control, and erosion control. Also included is groundwater recharge. The types of stormwater BMPs categorized for the purpose of maintenance include the dry basin type, the wet basin type, the vegetative type, and MTDS, which are manufactured treatment devices.